In 1997, Apple's stock had collapsed to around $13 a share, down from nearly $65 just 2 years earlier. The company had lost over 80% of its value, and it had burned through $1 billion in a single year. The company had 90 days of cash left. Thousands of employees had no idea if they'd have jobs by Christmas, and the only man who could save it was the person every Apple fan called the enemy. It started with one of the greatest betrayals in business history. In 1985, Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, was voted out of the company he built by his own board, his own people. He walked out of Apple's doors with nothing but a wounded ego and a burning obsession to prove them wrong. He spent the next 12 years in the wilderness. He found a new company, Next. He bought a small animation studio called Pixar. He was busy, but Apple was slowly dying without him. By 1997, Apple had burned through CEO after CEO. The product lineup was a joke, a dozen versions for the Mac alone, each one more confusing than the last. The company was losing $1 billion per year. They were 90 days from being insolvent. The board made a desperate decision. They acquired Next, Jobs' struggling company, for $429 million. And with it, they got Jobs back, but not as CEO, just an advisor. But everyone in the room knew who was actually in charge then. Jobs walked into Apple headquarters and saw the carnage. So many product lines, bloated teams, no vision, no soul. He picked up a marker, walks to the whiteboard, and drew a 2x2 grid. Consumer, professional, desktop, portable. 4 products. That's it. Everything else dies. People were terrified. Careers evaporated overnight. Projects that took years were killed in a single meeting. Jobs was cold, precise, surgical, like a Ronin hired to save a fallen dojo, even if it means burning half of it down first. But the company was still bleeding cash. The surgery wasn't working fast enough. Apple needed money, immediately. Jobs picked up the phone and dialed a number that shocked everyone around him. Bill Gates. To Apple fans in 1997, Bill Gates was the villain of the entire tech universe. There was no love lost between these two men or their armies of fans. But Jobs wasn't calling as a fan. He was calling as a CEO who needed to save his company. The deal, Microsoft would invest $150 million into Apple. In return, Apple would drop ongoing lawsuit against Microsoft and commit to making Internet Explorer the default browser on all Macs. Microsoft would also guarantee to keep making Microsoft Office for Mac for the next 5 years. $150 million. Not a fortune for Microsoft. But for Apple in 1997, it was oxygen. The announcement happened at Macworld 1997, one of the biggest Apple events of the year, packed with true believers. Jobs takes the stage. He starts talking about partnerships, about the future. I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, a very, very meaningful one, and that is one with Microsoft. The crowd erupts, not in cheers, boos. Jobs talks over the noise. Gates appears on the giant screen behind him, live via satellite. He lays out the roadmap, commits to Office for Mac, explains the $150 million investment, and touches on the collaboration with Apple in the coming days. Finally, he thanks the crowd. The feed cuts. The arena is still growling. Jobs picks up the microphone, calm, unhurried, unmoved, thanks Bill, and turns to the audience. We have to let go of this notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. We have to embrace the notion that for Apple to win, Apple has to do a really good job. We need all the help we can get. The crowd quiets. Jobs had just made a deal with the devil to save his company in front of 10,000 people who did not like that deal at first, and he wasn't apologizing for it. The $150 million buys Apple time. Jobs uses every second of it. 1998, the iMac, a colorful, gorgeous, all-in-one computer that looks like it arrived from another planet. It sells 800,000 units in its first 5 months. 2001, iTunes and the iPod. Suddenly, Apple isn't just a computer company. It's a culture. 2007, the iPhone, the product that changes everything, not just for Apple, for the entire world. And that $13 per share Apple stock, its peak stock price at the start of 2026 was more than $270. That's a gain over 1,900% on the real price alone. And on a split-adjusted basis, the journey is even more staggering. The same investment would have grown over 15,000%. In 2022, Apple became the first first company in history to reach a $3 trillion market cap, the most valuable company on Earth, built from a $13 stock and a phone call to the enemy. And Microsoft's $150 million investment? They sold it quietly, years too early, walking away from what would eventually have been worth billions. The lesson isn't about Apple. It's not even about Steve Jobs. It's about what you do when the situation is genuinely, undeniably bad. Most people in that situation spend their energy fighting the reality of it, arguing that it shouldn't be this bad, looking for someone to blame, waiting for conditions to improve before they start working. Jobs didn't do any of that. He accepted the situation completely. Apple was broken. The product line was a bloated mess, a dozen versions of the Mac that not even Jobs himself could make sense of. The cash was nearly gone. The board was in panic. He didn't waste a single hour pretending otherwise. And then, from inside that total acceptance, he worked. He made the call everyone said was unthinkable, the call to his biggest rival. And he stood in front of 10,000 unhappy fans and didn't apologize for it once. He did all of it not because the odds were good, but because the only way out was through. That's the real formula. Not talent, not luck, not being born with the right idea at the right time. Accept where you actually are. Then outwork the situation until the situation has no choice but to change. Apple didn't win because everything went right. Apple won because when everything went wrong, the losses, the humiliation, the booing crowd, all of it, one person refused to pretend it hadn't, and then refused to stop anyway. Remember, every fortune has a story, and every story has a lesson. What other money stories should we cover? Drop your suggestions in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time.